Hey, fellow YouTubers, Roland Martin here. Hey, I'm getting ready to go fishing. But you know, there's so many things I need to get ready to do before I go fishing. You know, there's about 5 or 6 tools I need that I have to have. A couple other items that before we ever leave the dock, I got to have them in my possession. Number one, probably the most important tool that I think I ever use is a good sharp penknife. I'm always cutting lines. I'm always trimming up lure. I'm just doing so much with a good sharp penknife and a good sharp knife as well. So I got a little sharpener system. So that's the first thing I did is a good knife. Now, just kind of jumping around here, this is a scale. You don't have to have a scale. But I've been doing YouTubes lately, and I say, well, here's a 5-pound bass, and I'm getting so many comments saying, oh, Roland, you don't know what you're talking about. That fish is only 4.5 pounds or 3 or whatever it is. So now on the bigger fish, at least I'm weighing them, and I get good batteries as well. So that's just something that I've just kind of recently added. Okay, pliers. Okay, there's nothing like a good pair of pliers. Now, it's just for safety reasons. I got a funny thing to tell you about pliers. I was fishing one time with President Bush Sr. We were on Ray Scott's Lake, and we were doing this big Eagles of Angling big tournament thing. And the president hooked himself in the hand with a plug, with a rattle trap plug. And I said, Mr. President, you've hooked yourself. He says, yeah. He says, I said, let me call the boats. There was a bunch of boats around with the press corps, and there were the Secret Service guys in different boats and stuff, and they were all watching us fish. He said, Roland, don't say anything. Pretend like I'm not hooked. Because if they know I'm hooked, they'll rush me to Walter Reed Hospital and they'll make a big national deal out of it. And I won't be able to fish for a whole month and I'll just ruin the whole day. So pretend like I'm not hooked. He said, I'm going to go down in the ice chest and I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to put it down in the cokes in the ice. And while I'm at it, here, do you want a Coke? And so here's the President of the United States holding his hand in the water trying to get it numb. And he's handing us Cokes to drink, just to kind of as a sideline. And so everybody's saying, what's the President of the United States down on his knees for, handing these guys Coca-Colas? Well, they didn't know. They didn't know he was hooked. So anyway, he said, no, Roland, he said, I'll tell you, when you stand up, take these pliers, grab that hook and rip it out of my hand. I don't care, just take it out. And pretend like nothing's happening. So he stands up, and he stands up from the ice chest, he comes up like this, and I grab the hook like this, I go, yes! Pull it right out. He said, that's good. There's blood a little bit. He went down. But no one ever knew that the President of the United States was hooked. And these pliers pulled it out. Well, not these, but the ones just like it. Okay, that was a really neat story. And it was one of the most honorable things I ever had happen, just to be able to have the opportunity to fish with the President of the United States. What an honor. Okay, side cutters. Now, we do a lot of saltwater fishing. And there's a lot of times that you have saltwater leaders, big steel leaders. I got some steel leaders over there. And you have to cut the leader sometimes, the steel cable or steel just mono leaders with that. And if you had real heavy line, for example, really thick 100-pound line, like I got some right here, some big 100-pound stuff, this is probably the best way to cut it. They have great big side cutters like this. You can cut right through the line no matter what. Just boom, cut it real easy. So side cutter pliers are really good, and you really have a firm grip on removing hooks as well. Okay, that's a couple of the things. You got to have pliers, and you got to have a knife. Now, when I go to church, I got super glue in my pocket. When I go fishing, I got super glue in my pocket. I got super glue in my pocket every single day of the year, because there's so many uses you can use for super glue. That's just a perfect example. How many times do you break a rod? I mean, you know, sometimes you got a broken rod. And you got these little guides laying around. Here's a guide right here. Let's see, and I had a guide laying here on the counter, right here. I've taken that guide out. I looked at one of my good favorite rods, and for whatever reason, I noticed there was a guide missing. Right here. There's a guide missing right there. Beautiful rod. One of my favorite rods of all times, but it's missing a guide. So I've taken a guide off an old broken rod, I don't know if it's years old, and I'll take I don't see as well as I used to. I have bifocals. That's another thing you need. You need a good set of bifocals. Okay, and I'm going to come up here to the rod, and I'm going to, that's a single foot guide, and I can move it back and forth, And I can just move it down. I'm just take my pliers again and just move that guide back and forth and push it down a little bit. Push it down the rod. Okay, it's in there pretty good. Now I take my super glue, and crazy glue is just as good, and puncture the seal and make it sure it comes out. Take a drop, come right here on the guide. While I'm at it, I'm just going to put a drop of super glue on all these guides so that they won't come out. And that's a good preventive thing. Now, speaking of guides, there's another thing while I'm looking at these guides. How often do you set the hook? And it happened to me a couple times this week. I had a guide that was broken. I had a guide, and I was doing some film work, and I set the hook, and I had big heavy braid. Boom, the line breaks. I said, "What is going on? How did that line break?" I'll tell you how it breaks. These guides have they're like an agate. It's a sharp. It's a hard material, but when it cracks, and it'll actually cut your line like a knife. So the way to check it is take a Q-tip. I got some Q-tips right here. I'll take a Q-tip out, and I'll just stick it up in the guide like this, and just kind of run it around in there. I'll feel for abrasives. Now, if there's a crack in that guide, it'll catch those fibers of the cotton that's on the Q-tip, and you'll see the little fibers come off. So you can just roll that little guide, go around on those guides, and sure enough, you can see if there's a crack here. I don't see a crack. And just by inspect them in general, you can see if they're broken half in two. In fact, when I looked at that guide that was cutting my line, it was half of it was broken. It was just looking at it close like this is a big deal. So I'm just going along. I'm just looking at all these guides and just kind of checking to see if any little fibers or filaments of that cotton get pulled off. And I didn't see anything. So we have a perfectly good rod, ready to go, checked out for any cracks, and replaced the guide as well with super glue. Let me tell you another story about super glue. I use it so much. One time I was out with Mel Tillis. You know the country singer? He died about 2 or 3 years ago. But Mel was in West Palm Beach for doing a concert, and he was fishing with me one Sunday afternoon. And I fished with Mel a lot of times because I actually grew up in Pahokee, Florida. It was just on the east end of Lake Okeechobee. But he likes to fish a lot, and he was, into bass fishing. So we were fishing that afternoon, and his tooth, one of his teeth, fell out on the floor. It was a cap. It fell out. And he said, Roland. He says, and he stutters. He said, Roland, my tooth fell out. Yeah, take me to the dentist. And so he stuttered. I said, Mel, there's no dentist a Sunday afternoon. Your concert's in a couple hours. There's just not going to be any way to get you to a dentist in time. There's just no dentist around. He said, well, I got to do something. I said, give me that tooth. I cleaned his tooth. I took the super glue, put in that tooth, stuck it up in Mel's mouth, and everything was fine. He called me about a week later. He said, Roland, he said, the concert went well. He said, but how do I get the tooth out? My dentist can't get the tooth out. I don't know what happened. Anyway, it fixed his tooth, and it was a big deal. So that's a couple things that are really, really important. Okay, now here's another item that's necessary. I don't care where you go fishing. You have to have good polarized sunglasses like these Flying Fishermen's that I have on. Now, I'm telling you, there's two reasons why I use them. Of course, they're polarized. I can see in the water better. That's not one. Number two, they're eye protection. They're protection from flying lures. I've had people write back and say, hey, a lure came flying through the air and hit my sunglasses. Maybe even broke my sunglasses, but it saved my eye. I have other people talking about how, and the doctors will say, hey, there's ultraviolet radiation coming in that'll give you cataracts, and you have to guard against that. Direct exposure to the sun will give you cataracts in the long run. So anyway, sunglasses with polarization like these Flying Fishermen are just absolutely 100% important. Another thing that's really, really good, I'm an old guy. I'm out in the sun a tremendous amount. Look at my arms. I mean, I got sunspots on them and everything else. But here's this product here. This is kind of cool because we're in South Florida. This is a bullfrog DEET free. It's a mosquito coat. It's a sunscreen and an insect repellent. Or you can just use the standard one. I kind of prefer the 50. The 50 is the highest one I can find. And I usually stay it on my hands like this, and then I rub it on my nose and the top of my ears. That's real important to be on the top of your ears because you get burned there. And on my lips, right here, okay? On my face, lips. I do that a couple times a day. Hey, that'll keep you from that melanoma. That's a bad, bad cancer. Hey, son, unless you do that, you're in trouble. Okay, you ready to go? Hey, check for your life vest. Make sure you have a life vest. Make sure you have a throwable cushion in the boat that you could, with 25 feet of rope, that's a requirement. Also check to see if you have a sound device, like a whistle or a horn. They're all requirements for the Coast Guard. And the last thing, make sure you have a fire extinguisher that's current and up to date. So there's just a few tips that I have for getting ready for your next trip. Listen, I post every Wednesday at about 6 o'clock and every Sunday at about 6 o'clock. I'm an old school teacher by trade, and I enjoy doing this. I was in the military running rifle ranges, so I like to teach people, and I'm kind of good at it. In fact, I can probably teach you to fish better than I can fish myself. But the point is, I enjoy it, and hey, I can teach you a thing or two. So join me on my YouTube channel. I'll see you then. Thank you.